The dusty wind of Montana carried the smell of loneliness across the wide plains. On the edge of town stood a worn-out ranch, silent except for the squealing of pigs and the groaning of its wooden fences. Inside, Thomas Hale, a rugged rancher with tired eyes, lived alone after years of burying his dreams under acres of barren soil. His heart had grown as empty as the barn he rarely entered anymore, until the day the town decided to send her. They called her the Fat Widow, behind her back, though her name was Clara Whitmore. Life had dealt her cruel hands, a husband lost to a mine collapse, whispers that she ate her grief, and a society that found comfort in mocking her pain. When the town council asked her to help feed Thomas Hale's pigs for a small wage, she agreed, not for money, but because it meant escaping the stares of people who'd forgotten how to be kind. When Clara first arrived at the ranch, Thomas didn't even open the door. He simply shouted from inside, "Feed's in the shed, don't come bothering me." His voice was rough like gravel, scraping every word with bitterness. Clara, clutching her shawl tight against the wind, said nothing. She trudged to the pen, scattering feed while tears blurred her vision. The pigs seemed kinder than people, at least they didn't laugh when she cried. Days turned into a quiet routine. She came before sunrise, left after dusk. Thomas never spoke more than a grunt or a "thanks." Yet, one morning, she noticed something. His porch had been swept, and a chair had been set out facing the sunrise. She smiled faintly, realizing he'd done it for her, though he never said so. The silence between them was softening, like thawing snow after a long winter. Rumors began spreading through the town like wildfire. Thomas must be desperate, one man sneered. That widow's probably fattening his pigs and herself. They laughed at her behind closed doors, their words slicing sharper than any knife. But Clara didn't care anymore. For the first time in years, she felt seen, not as a burden, but as someone useful, even if only to a lonely rancher. One evening, Clara noticed Thomas standing near the pen, his rough hands trembling. "They say you don't talk much," she said softly. He didn't answer. After a long pause, he muttered, "Talking don't bring back what's gone." His voice cracked on the last word. She didn't ask more. Grief recognized grief. It didn't need explaining. From that night, she left a loaf of bread on his porch every morning. By dawn, it was always gone. Winter arrived early that year. The winds howled through the empty plains, rattling doors and freezing water troughs. Clara wrapped her shawl tighter each day, but she never missed her chores. One morning, as she arrived, she found Thomas collapsed by the barn door, pale and weak. Without hesitation, she dragged him inside, built a fire, and stayed all night nursing him. When he awoke, his first words were, "Why didn't you just leave me there?" "Because I know what it's like to be left behind," she replied simply. Her words hit him harder than any storm. For the first time, he looked at her, not just as a helper, but as a woman who had survived as much loss as he had. Something in his heart stirred, something buried long ago under sorrow and pride. The next few days, Thomas's strength returned, and so did his voice. They talked about small things, weather, chores, the stubborn mule that refused to pull the cart. Their laughter, faint but real, echoed through the ranch like sunlight breaking through clouds. Yet beneath the warmth, both felt something neither dared to name. One cold morning, Clara noticed a note pinned to the barn door, "You don't have to come anymore. The pigs can wait." Her heart sank. She thought she had done something wrong. Tears welled up, but she turned away, determined not to beg for kindness she hadn't earned. The next day, she didn't go to the ranch for the first time in months. Thomas spent that entire day staring at the empty pen. The ranch felt hollow without her humming, without the sound of her footsteps on the frozen dirt. He tried to eat but couldn't. For years, he had wanted to be alone. Now he realized how unbearable that loneliness truly was. The silence screamed louder than ever before. At sunset, Thomas saddled his older horse and rode into town. He found Clara at the general store, packing flour into a worn basket. The townsfolk fell silent as he stepped inside, mud on his boots and a strange fire in his eyes. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said gruffly, "you forgot your job." The crowd snickered, thinking he was mocking her. But then he added, "Feeding pigs ain't the same without your laughter." Clara froze. The entire store went still. Her cheeks flushed red as she stammered, "You don't need me there anymore." Thomas shook his head. "I don't need you to feed pigs. I need you to remind me life ain't over." For a moment, even the wind outside seemed to hold its breath. No one had ever spoken to her like that before, not with pity, but with honesty. That night, as the sky turned purple over the plains, Clara returned to the ranch. Thomas had lit a lantern for her, hanging it by the barn door. She stood beneath its glow, unsure whether to smile or cry. Somewhere deep inside, she felt something shift, a fragile hope taking root in soil that had long been barren. She didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. The days that followed felt different, lighter somehow. Clara arrived earlier than usual, and Thomas had already set coffee boiling over the stove. He didn't say much, but he poured her a cup, and that simple gesture said everything words couldn't. The loneliness that had ruled the ranch for years began to fade, replaced by something tender, unspoken, and real. For the first time, laughter became part of their mornings. The town didn't take long to notice. Gossip spread faster than prairie fire. The widows caught herself a rancher, they whispered. Some mocked, others pretended pity. But Thomas didn't care. He stopped visiting town altogether. Clara, too, learned to walk past their sneers with her head held high. Together, they built a quiet world of their own, one where kindness spoke louder than cruelty. Spring came, melting the last traces of frost. The ranch began to thrive again. Pigs grew fat, crops pushed through the soil, and for the first time in years, Thomas planted flowers by the porch. "You did this," he said one morning as she handed him his coffee. Clara laughed. "All I did was feed pigs." "No," he said softly, "you fed a broken man back to life." His words made her eyes glisten, though she quickly turned away. But peace rarely lasts without a test. One afternoon, a stranger rode into town, a slick man from Helena claiming to buy ranches cheap and flip them for profit. When he reached Thomas's gate, he smirked at Clara. "A woman doing a man's work," he said mockingly. "Maybe I should buy the ranch and hire someone slimmer." The insult stung, but Clara didn't answer. Thomas, however, stepped forward with fire in his eyes. "You'll do no such thing," Thomas said firmly. "This ranch ain't for sale." The man sneered, "You're wasting your time with that woman. Everyone in town laughs at you." Thomas's jaw clenched. "Then let them laugh," he said. "They've been laughing their whole lives and still don't know what love looks like." The stranger's smirk faded. He tipped his hat and left, but not before muttering, "You'll regret it." Thomas didn't even glance his way. That night, Clara sat by the window, shaken by the confrontation. "You shouldn't have said that," she whispered. "They'll talk even more now." Thomas leaned against the doorframe, watching her. "Let them talk," he said. "You're the only one who's ever made this place feel alive." Her tears fell silently, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming feeling of finally being enough. A week later, disaster struck. A fire broke out in the barn, started, perhaps, by a fallen lantern or, as Thomas suspected, by that jealous stranger. Flames devoured the hay bales and crept toward the pens. Thomas rushed inside to free the animals, coughing through the smoke. Clara, terrified, ran after him. "Thomas!" she screamed. Through the haze, she saw him struggling with the last gate. Without thinking, Clara grabbed a bucket and began dousing flames, her arms burning from the heat. When the fire finally died down, the barn was half gone, but Thomas was alive, thanks to her courage. He stared at her, soot on her face, hair tangled, hands trembling. "You're crazy," he said, voice cracking. "You could have died." She smiled weakly. "So could you. Guess we're both fools." They laughed through tears, clinging to each other as dawn broke. News of the fire spread, and for the first time, the town didn't mock. They came to help rebuild. The same people who once sneered at her size now worked beside her. Maybe it was guilt, or maybe they finally saw what real strength looked like. Clara's laughter filled the air again, and Thomas, hammer in hand, felt something he hadn't in years. Pride, not for his land, but for the woman who saved it. As spring deepened, the ranch became a symbol of rebirth. Children from town began visiting to feed the pigs, and Clara taught them gently, never letting them call the animals dirty. Everything deserves care, she said, even the things others overlook. Thomas watched her from the porch, realizing she'd done for him exactly what she now did for those children, reminded them all that love could grow anywhere, even in mud. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Thomas took Clara's hand. "You've given me more than anyone ever has," he said. "You've given me a reason to stay alive." Clara looked away, her heart pounding. "And what have you given me?" she teased softly. He smiled. "A place where you never have to be ashamed again." In that moment, she knew she was home, not just on his ranch, but in his heart. Months later, the townsfolk gathered for the harvest fair. Thomas and Clara arrived together, hand in hand. Whispers started again, but this time they didn't sting. Instead, people smiled. Children ran to hug Clara, shouting, "Miss Clara, we saw your pig win first prize." The crowd cheered. Thomas looked at her, pride glowing in his eyes. She laughed, a sound so bright it silenced even the cruelest tongues. When evening fell, the band began to play a slow tune. Thomas offered his hand shyly. "I haven't danced since my wife passed," he admitted. Clara hesitated, then placed her hand in his. Under the soft lights in the wide Montana sky, they danced. For once, no one laughed. Some cried quietly, watching two souls who had known too much loneliness finally find peace in each other's arms. Years later, people still told their story, the fat widow who came to feed a lonely man's pigs and ended up feeding his heart instead. The ranch thrived, not because of wealth, but because love had taken root in its soil. On quiet evenings, when the wind carried laughter across the fields, neighbors swore they could still hear Clara humming by the barn. She had come there broken. She stayed because he refused to let her go.